Well, good morning, everyone, and so glad that we're all here together to worship today. Hope everybody had a great spring break to all who celebrate. I know I sure do. Today, we're moving deeper into our series talking about people who had really unique encounters with Jesus in the days leading up to his death and resurrection. And I was thinking about the other day, imagine actually being one of these people that we've been talking about. And you go about your life normally, and then one day Jesus shows up. And I was thinking, man, how would we react? I kind of think of it the way how we wonder how we would react if we met our hero. Would we, just try to keep it cool? My hero's over here, just being cool. Or would we just freak out and go crazy and be like, oh, selfie, what up? Or would we just freeze and not know what to do, right? And you would think it would be that way if, I don't know, the Savior of the world, God's Son, if he showed up to you and responding to his voice, that was at the forefront of your mind. But in Matthew 27, we're introduced to a guy who has Jesus, who should be his hero, standing in front of him. But instead of recognizing that and responding to his voice, this guy is worried about what a lot of other voices in his life might be saying. And so we're going to read Matthew 27, and we're going to start reading at verse 11. And here's what it says. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast of the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." Here we have Pilate, the governor of this province, the boss, or as we would call John Sweeney in Costa Rica, El Jefe. This is the guy who is supposed to be the most powerful person in the room. And one day he meets someone who's unlike anybody he's ever met. He didn't believe any of the Messiah claims about this guy, but he knew there was something up with this man. Not in a bad way. Pilate knew a rebel when he saw one, and Jesus wasn't that. And Jesus, there was just something powerful about him to Pilate. He had some kind of power that Pilate didn't have. And so what should have been an open and shut case where the judge cannot find any fault in the defendant, Pilate should have said, "Okay, this guy Jesus is innocent, he's good to go." Instead of making that statement, Pilate asks a question. "What then shall I do with Jesus?" He's not asking that question to himself. He's not asking it to Jesus. But instead, Pilate's directing that question to all the voices around him. Why? Because he wanted the words and actions of his to be pleasing to them. Pilate wanted to know what the crowd thought first before he did anything. He wants to please Caesar. He wants to please the religious leaders. He wants to please the crowd. This guy is straight up a people pleaser. And when I say people-pleasing, what I don't mean is that you're just a cool person to be around, because that itself is not bad. Paul actually says in 2 Corinthians 2:15 that as Christians, we're supposed to be the aroma of Christ to everyone we encounter. So we're supposed to be good and kind and loving to the point where we're pleasant to be around. My wife helps me with this by reminding me that rubbing it in people's face that my bracket is in the 99.8th percentile and theirs is not, that's not always the pleasing aroma of Christ, even though it's true. But when I say people pleasers, I mean instead of living from that transformed heart towards others, you live your life in order to get something from others. What? I don't know, approval, validation, being not on the outside, but being on the inside, and you fit in, and you feel that belonging. You might not always think of yourself as a people pleaser, but I think to one degree or another, we all are. I mean, think about it. Be honest with yourself. Not all of us are always cool going against the current of what everybody else around us is wanting or doing. I know that intimidates me. I can't tell you how many times in the past year, whenever someone's asked me my preference for something, and I say, oh, I have no preference. What do you want to do? Like when my friends want to go out to eat and I want Thai food, but everyone else wants Taco Mama again, and I'm just like, okay, cool. And I just roll with it because I don't want to be that person that kills the vibe of the whole group. And part of that is me trying to be flexible, but a deeper part of that is me worrying that what I say or what I do is not going to be accepted by the group. Maybe too big of an ask, or maybe cringe, or maybe it's offensive. And so I'm afraid. And so I tell people what they want to hear, even though I'm not being honest, or I know that it's wrong. Can y'all relate to that? And this might not seem like that big of a deal in life, but for Pilate, this was not a small character flaw. No, Pilate had a weakness for this. And that weakness moved him off center from what he knew was right. It was more important to him what people thought than what was the right thing to do. And Pilate knew deep down that sentencing this man Jesus, he knew that was not the move. The religious leaders, they wanted this man, they call it a liar, to be pushed aside. But Pilate knew he wasn't lying. Rome wanted a threat dealt with, but Pilate knew that he wasn't a threat. His wife even did not want him to have anything to do with this Jesus because, I don't know, she had like some sort of Jesus nightmare, I guess, which would be a fun name for like a Christian metal band, Jesus Nightmare. But she doesn't want him to have anything to do with this guy, but Pilate can't help but be amazed by this person standing in front of him. This person who's not motivated by pleasing others, but motivated by something else. I mean, look at verses 13 and 14. Did y'all notice that the thing that struck Pilate the most about Jesus is that the chief priests and elders, they're saying all these awful things about this guy, but he's not responding to any of it. And Pilate's like, how can you be cool with that? How can you be so unbothered by that? He marveled at this unbothered man in front of him, but Pilate was so controlled by the desire to not go against all the other voices around him that he felt stuck. And everyone, that's because people-pleasing will trap you. I'm not saying that someone's going to throw you in prison if you don't go along with what they want. That happens some places in the world, but not all the time here. But being a people-pleaser will cause you to not do the things you should and to do the things you shouldn't. And here's the prison that it is, everyone. If you spend all of your time pleasing people, shaping your life around what all the voices around you want, then you'll always have to be guessing how you should come across to people. Because what people can want from you can change like that. You'll have to always be wondering if Is what I'm doing cool with what they want? And you're always going to have to be chasing that validation from other people that can be here today and gone tomorrow. People-pleasing can trap you. Pilate is trapped by wanting to make everybody happy. And at the end of the passage, he thinks that he found a solution. Verse 24 in Matthew 27 says, "So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, 'I'm innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves.' And all the people answered, 'His blood be on us and our children.' Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified." Pilate here thinks he's found an escape, only he hasn't. He thinks he can wash his hands of this situation. He can plead ignorance. He thinks he can be like me whenever I say, "Oh, I have no preference. Y'all can do whatever you want. I'm cool, just being over here. Y'all can do y'all thing, but I'm here. I'm not involved." And everyone, it's really easy to wash dirt off of your hands, but you can't wipe away responsibility. That's one thing none of us can get rid of. God shows us right and wrong. He puts things on our heart for a reason, and it's not to be a bystander. And I can't help but feel bad for this guy, because Pilate's so caught up with what people are going to say about him and do with him that he's afraid to take a stand and be the person that God has meant for him to be. So he's not escaped. Because after this trial, and after Jesus is sent to be crucified, if Pilate keeps living his life, trying to please people, trying to chase their approval that can be here today and gone tomorrow, if he keeps doing that, then he'll always be trapped. That's what people-pleasing can do. And hear this, everyone. Pilate's not some villain that we can point a finger at. He's us. My desire to want to please people, to be on their good side, y'all, that's caused me to do some things that I'm not proud of. I've been around people when we were gossiping about someone, and part of me knew it was wrong, but I wanted to be cool with everyone, so I said awful things about people that would have crushed them if they were in the room to hear it. Early on in college, people around me, their voices, they were big into partying and all the bad stuff that goes along with that. And I wanted to please them, so I did too, even though I hate partying. Like, there's so much other things I would rather be doing. I'm kind of an introvert, but I wanted to be valuable to people. I wanted that so bad, so I went along with it. And if it's so easy for me to cave into shaping my life so that it vibes with other people, then at the end of the day, is my life asking that same question, the one that Pilate asked? What should I do with Jesus? I let other people decide that for me far too often. What am I going to do with what he's taught me? What am I going to do with what he's done for me? What should I do with Jesus? I don't know. What do my friends think I should do with him? And everyone, I do not want to chalk this message up here. I don't want to end it with that phrase that our parents would always tell us, well, if all of your friends were going to jump off a cliff, should you? And you're like, okay, Mom, I won't do it then. That's great advice. But instead of saying that, I want to tell you all that someone came into our world, a human, and he faced the same pressure to please all the voices around us in life, and he did what you and I could not do, and he showed us what a life following one voice could do. I know I've been talking about Pilate up until now and his people-pleasing problem, but there's two other characters in this story. One of them, his name was Barabbas. He was a criminal, a prisoner, who in Luke's gospel is mentioned to be in jail for causing a riot and murder. He was a part of a group called the Zealots, and I'm sure he had a lot of people in his life that in order to please them, he had to be tough, he had to be a fighter, he had to take actions into his own hands. This is a bad guy, is what I'm getting at. And he stands before all these people, and the law says that he should be thrown in prison for the rest of his life. He should be trapped, he should be put to death. But there's someone else. There's someone who's standing next to him in this moment that freely chose to be there, and his name is Jesus. Now, if he cared about people pleasing, he would speak up in this moment. Hey, I didn't mean those things I said. Actually, I don't think God has a problem with y'all doing those things you're doing. I'm the good guy. You should crucify Barabbas instead, but he doesn't say that, does he? That's because Jesus, he's not bothered. He's not intimidated. He's not trapped because he is not about pleasing everyone. He doesn't follow the zealots against Rome. He doesn't follow Rome. He doesn't follow the Pharisees. He follows one voice, his Father's. We have so many voices around us shouting for us to come and be a part of their crowd, their movement, their purpose, and it was the same for Jesus. He had all these voices in his life speaking against the person that God had called him to be, but Jesus, he's not trapped by them. Why? Because his motivation is not about what he can get from others. His motivation is to follow a perfect plan from a perfect God who has a perfect love for him and for you and for me. That's his motivation. And what happens when you follow God's voice like Jesus does? What happens is you have freedom. Jesus is free from the pressure. Barabbas gets to be freed because of who Jesus is in this moment. Now, make no mistake, Pilate is just releasing this guy Barabbas because that's what the crowd wants. He's probably not feeling a lot of sympathy for Barabbas. But y'all, I think it's really good news that in this moment, when someone is asking, what should I do with Jesus? We see more clearly than ever what Jesus wants to do with us. And that's to set us free like he already is. Jesus is free because he follows one person's voice. And it's coming from a Father who knows us and who has our best interest at heart. He's free following God, and so are you and I, because that's what we were born to do. We weren't meant to be characterized by the meanness that's out there in the world, but by God's kindness. There's a reason that we can feel good in our hearts when we embrace that. I was not meant to be following all the voices in my life that try to pull me away from God, but God destined for me and for you to be like what he says in here. That's the real us. Not the person following all the noise out there, but by following his voice. And I'm not the best at it, but I gotta tell you, I'm more free and unbothered today than I was yesterday listening to all those other voices in my life. Pilate, the guy who should hold all the power, he's actually imprisoned by the voices of others. But Barabbas, the guy who deserves to be a prisoner, he ends up going free because that's what Jesus came to do. Paul actually writes about this in Galatians 5. Paul says that for freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Y'all, Pilate's legacy was being a people pleaser, and he was remembered for what he did not do. But Jesus' legacy is about who he was and what he did. Pilate wanted to sit on the fence, but Jesus clearly made known his intentions. Pilate wanted to wash his hands of the situation, but Jesus never washes his hands of your situation, no matter how bad it may ever get. And so hear this good news that I want to tell you, everyone. Jesus freely gave himself up in this moment to the authorities so that he could set us free from the sin and the brokenness of our world, those voices that can trap us. And he did that so that when we look at his sacrifice, born out of freedom, we could believe it and be freed by it. And not just free to go and walk away, everyone, but free to live. Free to live the way that God destined for us, not boxed in by all the noise out there, but free to respond to God's word shown to us through Christ. So what then should we do with this person who stood in our place? What are you going to do with Jesus? I don't blame you if you've ever asked questions that I know I have. I've asked myself, is this going to cost me? Am I gonna lose friends because of this? Are people going to be weirded out by this? Is not everyone going to get along with me following Jesus? What happens with that? Those are the questions I've asked when I've been trapped by fear and I've let the world tell me who I'm meant to be. But I keep coming back to who God is and what has God done with me. God's not asking that I please people in order to get a false sense of worth from them, because God is already pleased with me. God is already pleased with you. So what to do with Jesus? No more, what will people think? Trying to please the voices that'll trap you, but instead ask yourself, what does God think? What has God done with me? He saved me and freed me to a new life, following his voice, not the voices of others. He's freed me away from fear, away from pressure, and away from emptiness. And he's given me freedom. Follow that one voice and be freed by him, everyone. Let's pray together.